Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Between Now and Success. Steve Sandusky here, and I am joined by two giants in the financial services profession, as well as two giants in the mountain climbing adventure community. I've had the great pleasure of being on 2 or 3 trips with you guys, and so this is going to be a lot of fun talking about your careers a little bit, but for the most part, talking about adventure, what you guys have done, some lessons learned, and how those apply to how you live life and how you work as well. So Skip Schweiss and Scott MacKillop, guys, great to see you again.
Good to see you, Steve. Thanks for having us on.
Steve. One of the
All right. Well,
seeing you indoors.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I see you got your mountain backdrop there. I've got my painting, and Scott, I'm not sure what you got back there.
That's a souvenir from my Mount Kilimanjaro trip. So that's a African wall hanging. Yeah.
Very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. Well, let's start with some brief introductions. I know I could not do justice to you two guys, so I'd love for you to each take a moment here and tell us a little bit about your background and career-wise, and then also a little bit adventure-wise. So, Scott, since you're the elder statesman here of the three of us, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, I'm CEO of First Ascent Asset Management. It's a TAMP that serves financial advisors. We do portfolio management for advisors. I've been in the TAMP business for 30-something years now. I think before the term TAMP was coined, I've been in financial services about 45 years now. And yeah, this is my 5th TAMP, and I'm having a good time.
So you were TAMP before TAMP was cool.
That's right. TAMP before TAMP was cool. Yeah, well, we decided to do some new things at this TAMP. So we have a flat fee business model, which is a little different than the other TAMPs, and a few other things that we're doing that I think are pretty cool. So advisors apparently like it. We've been ranked 3 years in a row as the #1 TAMP based on client satisfaction in the Bob Virus, Joel Bruckenstein survey. Yeah, so we're trying our best to serve the financial advisor community this way.
And I would venture to say that you're probably the only TAMP founder who's also a singer, songwriter, guitar player.
That may be true. Yeah, I'm probably the only old TAMP founder that's still around. Most of them have moved on, but yeah. Anyway, I do combine some musical talents with my TAMP background. Yeah,
you do, and I remember getting some of your holiday greetings with you singing a song, strumming the guitar. So
yeah,
those are always look forward to those.
Kind of keep the musical thing going at the same time.
Excellent. And you're coming to us today from where?
Denver, Colorado.
Denver, Colorado. All right.
Yeah.
Skip, tell us about Skip.
Yeah, great to be with you guys. I was born and raised in the flatlands, the plains of South Dakota, and followed a girl to Colorado, and she and I have been married 36 years, so that's worked out okay. And I was in the custody business for a long time with Fiserv and TD Ameritrade, and Scott's firm was a client of ours. I got to know him a little bit through his work there, and then his professional life brought him to Denver from Atlanta. And we lived in the same town then, and started doing things together, going to ball games and concerts and going out for hikes and skiing, and just figured we really enjoyed each other's company, had a lot in common, and it's been a great friendship since, and we've had a ton of great adventures together. Today I'm CEO of Sierra Investment Management. We are a combo retail RIA and asset management firm in Santa Monica, California. That's where I'm coming to you from today. Later today, I'll be flying across these mountains back home to Denver. So that's my commuting life these days.
Yeah, I think we've known each other about 30 years now. It's been a long time.
Feels about right.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's talk about the adventure side. So we'll start with you, Skip. You mentioned that you're from South Dakota. My mom is from South Dakota, a little town called Bone Steel. I think there's about 500 people there back in the day when she was there. Maybe it's down to 200 or so now. So how did you get interested? Were you interested in the outdoor stuff when you were in South Dakota, or was that something that really developed once you moved to the Denver area?
I grew up in the outdoors. My dad was really into hunting. He had 5 boys, and we all tagged along with him in the field, and we went fishing and boating, and we were all in Boy Scouts. We hiked and camped, and and all those sorts of things. So I grew up doing those sorts of things, and I got sort of a foundation for the outdoors. And then I moved to Colorado, and I looked up at those big mountains, and I went, wow, I should get up there and try some things. And honestly, I thought I'd live in Colorado for a couple of years and probably move back to my comfortable small town existence. And 38, I believe it is, years later, here I am, still really loving life in Colorado.
Do you remember that first mountain you climbed?
I do. I had actually lived in Colorado a couple of years and done not much more than stare up at the mountains. I think I had started to learn how to ski, which is kind of a painful process in the early going. And then one day I opened the newspaper, one of those old-fashioned paper things you open up and read in print. And there was a story about these 14,000-foot peaks in Colorado called 14ers. And I looked at my wife and called a friend of mine. I said, this sounds really interesting. I'd like to try one of these. And I did a little bit of research, and we picked one. It was not too far from Denver, maybe an hour west of town, and called Mount Bierstadt, right near Mount Evans. And we did it woefully ill-equipped. It was in September. I think we were wearing tennis shoes and jeans, and fortunately, it was a nice day, but we struggled with our really zero level of knowledge about how to do that, and very, very ill-equipped and ill-supplied, but we made it. And I think the next week we did, I was really excited about it. It was such a thrill for me. And the next week we did another one. And then it was getting into September, which really is kind of getting to the end of 14er season in Colorado without really escalating the challenge. And so we put it aside. And I still remember in the spring, I told everybody who would listen over the winter, I said, I am so stoked about this activity. I'm going to do them all. There are roughly 54 of these mountains in Colorado. I said, I'm going to do them all. I had people laugh at me, which is the last thing you want to do to me if you want to see me actually complete something. People think I was crazy. Well, in the spring, I told my wife, I said, hey, it's time. Let's go do that again. And she looked at me in a moment of great honesty and said, you know what? I really didn't enjoy that. You go do it. So I went and found some friends, and we did them all. So longer answer to your question, but that's how I started.
Yeah, well, I'm going to get into some more details there as well, but let me run over to you here, Scott. So tell me, how did you get in the mountain climbing? So you're not from Colorado, is that correct?
No, I'm from California originally. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and my dad was not an outdoorsman at all. And I think we went camping one time with a friend of his. But when I was about 15, a friend of mine in high school invited me along on a pack trip through the Sierras. So he was a burro boy on this pack trip, and the guy that ran the pack trip took kids from the Bay Area up into the Sierras to introduce them to the mountains, and so I signed up for the trip, and my parents wrote a check, and I got to go on this trip, and then they were going to do a couple more trips. And I just really fell in love with being in the mountains. And also I was helping my friend a lot with the burros. And so the guy who ran the trip said, hey, if you want to stick around, you could be on the next 2 trips. You won't have to pay anything, and you could just be an official burro boy. So I basically spent the summer up in the Sierras when I was about 15, just packing people through. That's the first time I climbed a 14er. We climbed Mount Whitney, actually a couple times during that summer. And little did I know we'd go back and do that again much later. But that's how I got started. And it was kind of love at first sight. I just, at that point, I don't think I had very much of a intellectual framework for understanding how, why I liked it so much. It was just fun. And I was with a lot of friends that I really enjoyed. And just the whole experience was wonderful. So ever since then, I've been looking up at mountains like Skip and wanting to climb them. So,
yeah, and I am nowhere near the same league as you guys when it comes to climbing and how many mountains you've climbed. And so my interest in mountain climbing first got kindled in 1980. So I'm going to date myself here. I was a senior in high school. was invited to run in a national cross country meet out in Seattle. I was born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska. So we get out there and we fly in, it's cloudy. I'm not seeing anything. And so then we wake up the next morning, we're in Puyallup, Washington. And I wake up, I walk outside, it's a clear sky. I look around, I'm like, oh my gosh, what in the world is that? Yeah. And of course, that was Mount Rainier.
Yeah.
And Puyallup is like right in the backyard of Mount Rainier. And it just was like the most beautiful thing I had just about ever seen. So I turned to my mom and I said, Mom, I'm going to come back someday and I'm going to climb that thing. And she's like, oh, okay, great, son. That'd be great. Well, life gets in the way. And it wasn't until, gosh, like more than 20 years later, I was reading Outside Magazine, and the cover story was like the top 10 climbs in North America. And they ranked them from like number 10. It's like, this is relatively easy. And they got progressively harder down to number 1. Well, like number, I'm going to say 5 or so was Mount Rainier. And they said, this is a climb that if you're in good shape and, you don't get altitude sickness, this is one that you could do. And here's the guiding companies that you can check out. And I said, okay, boom, I'm going to do that. So signed up with a guiding company, and it was 2004 was the first one. So that was my introduction to any type of significant mountain climbing, was Mount Rainier in 2004. And since then done a number of trips and several trips with you guys. So yeah, once you get the bug, it's hard to get it out of the system. That's for sure. Yeah. So let's talk some numbers. And I hate to get numerical here, but I just want to give our listeners and viewers a sense for your guys' accomplishments here. And Skip, I know you sort of glossed over this idea of having climbed all the 14ers in Colorado. I mean, that is an incredible accomplishment, like 54 mountains, over 14,000 feet. So you've done them all once, and I could be wrong, but have you done them all twice as well?
So I have not done them all twice. I go back now and I'll do 1 or 2 or 3 a summer just for the fun and fitness, I call it. So, but if I add all the times that I've been on top of a 14,000 foot peak in Colorado, I think it is 110 or some number like that, but not all of them twice.
Okay. And so give me a sense for, outside of the Colorado mountains, what are some of the other most interesting climbs or treks or any other outdoor adventures that you've done, whether that's here in North America or even outside of North America?
Sure. Years ago, I think like you, Steve, I fell in love with the Cascades in the Pacific Northwest. Those snow climbs are, I don't know how to describe it, but they're thrilling to me. And the teamwork involved when you're on a rope with your team, and it's such a gorgeous part of the country. So I've done, this isn't the Cascades, but if I go sort of south to north up in the Northwest, I've done Whitney and Shasta in California and Half Dome, and then Hood, Baker, Rainier, Shuckson. I don't know, Scott, what am I missing there?
Wasn't there one Adams?
I did Adams.
Yeah.
Adams. Yeah. I think that's most I've done in the Northwest, and I think I'm pretty satisfied with what I've done up there. I may get up there one other time, but then internationally, I went with some friends. We did Mount Fuji in Japan, which was a really, really neat cultural experience. A few years ago, we did some bike riding there as well. And then I went to, did Kilimanjaro, as Scott did quite a few years ago. Went down to Argentina a couple of years ago to attempt a 21,000 footer, and we got snowed off at about 18,000. So that was unfortunate, but that's part of the risk you take. You're not guaranteed that summit for sure. And that one's been eating at me since. That was right before the pandemic. It was November of 19, and we couldn't go back for a couple of years, but we're starting to talk about going back and giving that one another try. I'd like to get above 20,000 feet. I haven't done that yet, so that's a goal.
Excellent. Well, you alluded to the Pacific Northwest, which is where I've really done most of my climbing. One that I don't think you mentioned is Glacier Peak, which I did a couple years ago, which is another volcano out there in Washington. It's really the most remote of the Cascade volcanoes, and it's about a 38-mile round trip. and not too high. I think it's 10,000 and change, but absolutely stunner of a hike into the woods and up there. And you're just so remote. You're not going to see a lot of people there. So that's a pretty cool one. If you're looking for one more out in the Cascades, so it'd be kind of cool.
And actually, that is the one. If I go back, that's the one I would like to attempt.
Yeah. Well, let me know. I might tag along.
All right. It'd be fun.
Yeah. Scott, how about you? What are some of the other interesting climbs that you've done?
Yeah, I'm not as prolific as Skip. I think I actually started a little bit later. You know, that's my excuse anyway for not having numbers to match his. But I think I've been over 14,000 feet now, 39 times. Different mountains in Colorado, California, Washington, Oregon. Shasta, you know, did Shasta, you know, we'll maybe get into that story a little bit. You know, we all did Shasta together. And although Steve and I, not on our first attempt, did we reach the summit. I've done Whitney a few times, did Mount Rainier. That was quite a thrilling adventure given the weather that we had to contend with there. Mount Hood, Mount Baker, those are Northwest mountains. And then in Colorado, I don't know, I think I've done 23 or 24 of the 14ers here, and then Kilimanjaro over in Africa. That was pretty exciting as well.
So the three of us, we're not exactly spring chickens, although I would say we're probably all three good looking guys here.
Well, that's your audience.
That's right. At least it's what our wives tell us, right?
Yeah,
or we want them to tell us.
That's what we'd like to believe anyway. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. But, you know, it's like, we're still working hard. I mean, we're, you know, I don't know if Skip, if it's okay to say our ages here, but, you know, you and I, we're 60 and Scott, you're 71, you know, I mean, I think the three of us could probably be retired right now if we wanted to, but all three of us are still working hard in our careers. And we're also out doing these fun adventures. We're working hard, trying to take care of our health. So I'd love to hear from each of you. Really, what drives you? What motivates you? How do you think about career at this stage of your life when you could be retired? Just any mix of how you want to approach those. We'd love to hear how you think about that.
Scott?
Yeah. I thought, you know, I've thought about this question a lot, and you know, the immediate answers that come to mind when somebody says, well, why do you climb all these mountains? You know, I start with things like, well, I love the outdoors, and I love the beauty of nature, and I love being with my friends and hanging out and doing things. But, you know, you could do that. You could take a 5-mile hike here in Colorado and do that. So I started thinking a little more deeply about it a while back. And I think it has a lot to do with just the challenge of it. And it's really why I'm still working the way I'm working right now. It's just the challenge and what you learn about yourself, and really the self-discovery that comes along with pushing yourself to do things that are really hard, you know, that you've never done before and that you might not be able to do. You don't know until you get to the top of a mountain if you're going to get there. And sometimes you don't get there for various reasons. But it's I think it's a lot about the self-discovery, because you know, at the end of the day, it was like we're all going through life, and you've got to try to find something, you know, meaningful. And you know, at some level, I think for me, it's just like learning who I am and what I can do, and trying to maybe change the world a little bit for the better. And you know, you just push yourself and see what you can do, and you don't know what your limits are until you really push yourself. So I think it has a lot to do with just that self-discovery process, really. And so that's kind of how I look at it at this point. Yeah, I can go walk in the park with you guys if I want to enjoy the beauty of nature, but climbing a 14,000-foot peak is a whole different matter.
Well, how do you think about the aging piece? And what I mean by that is, if we look at what the three of us were doing 20, 30 years ago in terms of our physical capabilities, and then we look at, well, what can we do today at our age? Obviously, it's probably a little bit night and day. So how do you think about still being able to challenge yourself, but not being able to do the things that you could do 20 years ago? How do you still find the fulfillment in, well, I can't run a mile in 4 minutes anymore, but maybe I can run it in 7 minutes, or maybe I need to do something else that doesn't cause me to compare back to what I did when I was, 30 years younger. How do you think about the aging process and still challenging yourself?
You want to go for that one, Skip?
Yeah, I've never really been a competitive athlete, a little bit as a youth, but really wasn't much of an athlete as a youth. I don't consider myself an athlete now. My wife refers to me that as an endurance athlete at times. I just, for some reason, have a hard time attaching the word athlete to myself. But I feel like at 60, I can get up and down those mountains about as well as I could at 50 and 40 and 30. Part of that is I've learned how to prepare. I've learned much more about nutrition, about training, about hydration, about recovery, about pacing, rest intervals, all of those things that I feel like, I was doing the 14ers in my 20s, 30s, 40s, and there are a lot of times I feel better doing them now than I did then. It depends on which ones and what I take on. I did a pair of them that Scott's familiar with about a week or two ago, and felt like they beat me up pretty good, but I still ride my bike. I'll ride my bike 50 to 100 miles. I did a 100-mile bike ride on Saturday, a few days ago as we record this. My times are the same, and I've been doing that for years. My times in doing that are about the same as they were 10 years ago. I know that'll change. It's inevitable. Father Time is undefeated, but part of it is just getting smarter. It's sort of like when you see these really high-level professional athletes. I think about Tom Brady playing at a very high level at 45. If on the rare times you see him take off running, that's when you know he's 45. But other than that, he can do what he does at a very high level because he's got so much savvy, so much experience doing what he's doing, that he can still do it at a high level, even if physically he's not the same as he maybe was 20 years ago.
Yeah, you sort of make up for it with experience quite a bit, I think. And the more you do it, the more you expand your comfort zone. So I think this is a really important part of it. What first couple times you do these things, I was like, Skip, my first 14er on my own, other than those early trips up Mount Whitney, was a total disaster. Maybe we'll get into that story later, but it was the same thing. I didn't know what I was doing. I was ill prepared. But now when I go up, I went up a few weeks ago and climbed a 14er by myself, and I go sleep at the trailhead in my car, and I get up before the sun comes up, and I head up the trail, and I feel very confident and comfortable because I don't know what to expect from that particular mountain because I've never been on that particular mountain before. But you start to feel confident in your ability to deal with things that might come up. You don't have control over very much of what happens around you, but you have control over yourself, and you feel a little more comfortable. And I've slowed down on the uphill, certainly as I've gotten older. Skip's watched that process, probably to his chagrin. But once I get up to the top, I feel great. And coming down, I'm still a pretty good downhill hiker. I don't think I'm any worse of a downhill hiker than I was when I was younger. And you just kind of make up for it in terms of your mental capabilities. It's really, this mountain climbing thing is equally, physical and mental. There's two components to it, as you guys know. It's not just about your body. It's a lot about what's going on in your head when you're doing it. So yeah, I think, I've trailed up a little bit hiking uphill, but really, I think I'm making plans for 14ers next year. In fact, I still harbor hopes of squeezing one more in here. It's at the end of September right now. I might, pop up beginning of October and see what I could do, but we'll see.
So Skip, you mentioned Tom Brady, and so I was watching the football game with the Buccaneers and the Bears, and you mentioned Tom Brady took off for a run. I remember watching that. He gets his big run, and then at the end he slides, and it was like the most awkward slide I've ever seen. And he breaks the brace that he's got on his knees. And I turned to my wife and I said, this is the first time I've really seen Tom Brady show his age here. And he looked like he was 45 years old. But then you also mentioned you don't think of yourself as an athlete. So here you are, you're a guy, you've climbed over 100 mountains, over 14,000 feet. You bike 100 miles at a clip. You take care of your nutrition. You're doing all these exercising. I mean, if that's not the definition of an athlete, what is an athlete to you? How would you describe what an athlete is?
I don't know. I just have this mental thing. And I was, as I said earlier, I was a poor youth athlete. I was a scrawny little thing. I didn't have a whole lot of interest in it. I was slow and weak and all these things. And so I've just never my whole life considered myself an athlete, because I watched my peers as, high schoolers in college, and now I watch the professional athletes, and I've just never considered myself in the same arena as those people. And it's just a terminology thing for me, because I have had people refer to me as an athlete in these endurance activities. And it certainly, I suppose, requires some athleticism. What I have discovered through, and I think Scott spoke eloquently about this a few minutes ago, is you learn a lot about yourself, especially doing endurance, if you want to call them sports. And it is a lot of mental. You will reach a point on a mountain or on a 100-mile bike ride where your body just wants to give up, and you've got to shift into your mind, and you've got to get into your head and say, no, you're not giving up. The goal here was 100 miles. The finish line is still 20 miles away, and you've got to make it. And sometimes when you're really in the, back out here somewhere, and you're still miles away from the finish, you have to get into here. No one's coming to get me, and I can't just sit down because I'm tired and someone's going to rescue me. I've got to finish. And so whether you call it an athlete or not, there's a lot of the physical and the mental to it, as Scott said.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the mental side of it, because I always find this fascinating. And let's go with two examples, and maybe the answers differ based on each of these examples. So the first one is the bike ride. So let's say I want to do a 100-mile bike ride. I'm 80 miles into this. I'm dead tired. Do I really need to finish this? So when you're at that point, are you focusing on the finish line, or are you saying to yourself, I just need to get to that next signpost, and then after that, I need to get to that, the rest stop over there, or whatever it is? It's like, am I taking baby steps? I know I can get there, and if I can get there, well, then I can get to the next there, and eventually, I'm at 100 miles. So let's look at that example. And then the second example is you're on a mountain, and you want to get to the summit, but you're dead tired. Now, if you get to the summit, that's only halfway there. You got to get back down. So then how do you think about the risk reward versus, I want to get to the summit, I'm dead tired, versus I could get to the summit, but I may not have enough energy to get all the way back down? Where's that risk trade-off calculation? So either one of you or both of you, take that one if you would.
Yeah,
Maybe
I think
Go ahead, Scott. Start.
Okay. Yeah, I think almost every time I've ever climbed a big mountain, there's some point along the way where I go, what am I doing here? It's like, there's always this moment, especially the higher you get, for me, it's like once I'm over 13,000 feet and there's very little oxygen left, relative to the lowlands, and each step is a labor of love, and you really do have to push yourself. There's an uncertainty around what's going to happen. You don't really know. You at a certain point, once you've done it many times, then you have more confidence in your ability. But there's always, that's, I think, part of the reason why it's attractive is because it's not a Walt Disney ride, it's not Disneyland. You're out in a place where there is danger and bad things can happen to you, and you keep pushing on past that point. And you have to be aware of the risk and not be stupid about it. There are limits, and you have to have some vague idea of where they are, but you don't really know where they are until you get to them. That's the problem. So this is the self-discovery process, right? You're going and going, and you have to keep in your mind this equation of, when is enough? When do I need to turn around, not just for myself, but because my family is also going to be affected, and maybe I'm hiking with other people and they're also going to be affected if I balk, 13,000 feet, somebody has to get me down. So it's a hard calculation, but this is, I think, part of the attractiveness, at least for some people, is being able to step past the uncertainty point and keep going and see what you can do when you get there.
Yeah, I'll take it to the biking. When I'm at that, say 80-mile mark, and I'm just thinking, man, have I had enough, but I've got 20 miles to go. I have to go through a couple of things in my mind. First of all, I will usually get a hold of my mind and say, first of all, flush the negativity out, because that's not going to get you to the finish line. And just concentrate on, your rhythm of pedaling. And, I carry GPS like we so often do, all this technology we use anymore. And so, stop looking at your watch every half mile to gauge your progress. Just put that away for a little while. Focus on just grinding. And gosh, next time I look at my watch, hey, I'm at 85 and now I'm at 90. And I think I can do this now. I'll add on to what Scott was talking about in the mountains. When I get above about 13, that's when I really slow down. The oxygen at 14,000 feet is about a third thinner than it is at sea level. And I really feel it above about 13. And sometimes I will look up and I will say, well, there's a big boulder up there and it's going to take me maybe 30 steps to get to that boulder. That's my next goal. So it's more, I'm going to bite off small chunks. I will actually start counting my steps, and I'll say, hey, my goal is 30 steps. I'm going to take 30 steps before I stop and rest again. And you just, in life, sometimes you run a marathon one step at a time or 1 mile at a time. So there are different sort of mental games I play with myself to reach those longer goals.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's one, everything is one step at a time, whether you're building a company or whether you're climbing a mountain. It's if you are at 13,000 feet and you look up at the summit, that's a bad idea, because it's a long way still to go. And so you look at the boulder, or you just take one more step, or see if you could take 5 steps in a row without having to stop and take a breath. You start to play tricks with yourself. And I agree totally with what Skip said about purging all the negativity and the fear too, really the panicky part of fear, right? You want to be aware of the dangers around you, but you don't want that sort of big adrenaline shot of fear to hit you at that point. So it's a matter of learning to be calm and taking one step at a time.
Yeah, I want to build on that too. There have been many times in the mountains I've faced something that really didn't look comfortable to me, that was really unnerving to me. And I've learned how to deal with those things too. I mean, size up the challenge, make a calculated risk, but do it. I have found, to one of Scott's earlier points too, growth is not found within my comfort zone. I could stay within my comfort zone. I could have a nice life. But that's not where you grow. You grow by sizing up a challenge. I mean, 20 years ago, if you'd asked me if I could ride a bike 100 miles, I would have said, are you kidding? No way. There's no way I can do that. And then I started picking up a bike and getting out on weekends, and I'd ride 20 and 40 and 60 and 80 miles and then 100 and 105 and 110. And that is way beyond my comfort zone, or at least was at one point. Doing all these 14,000 foot peaks, or Kilimanjaro at 19,000 feet, was a very new experience for me, with different physiological and mental challenges to it. Yeah, when I was in my 20s and 30s, if you would have asked me if I'd be doing all this stuff in my 50s and 60s, I'd have said no way. But it's about, as Scott has said, you stretch yourself. If you want to grow, you got to take that next step where you think, this doesn't look very comfortable or feel very good, but I'm going to do it. And in the process, I'm going to grow.
Yeah, my comfort zone is a lot bigger now than it was when I was in my 20s and 30s.
Absolutely.
You just learn at a certain point that your comfort zone is a self-imposed limitation, really. It's, everybody's comfort zone has, they come in different shapes and sizes, but you find that is not, it's not like the nose on your face, it's not a feature that is fixed and permanent. It can change pretty dramatically. And, I, same way as Skip was talking about, I remember the first time I met a guy who ran a marathon that I knew, and he told me about it. I thought, how did he do that? How does he run 26 miles? And then, I don't know, some years later, I completed a few of them myself and thought, wow, that was something I never imagined that I could ever do. And again, you just you run 5 miles and you run 10 miles and then you run 15, and then you get some friends who push you a little farther, and the next thing you know, you completed some marathons and you move on to triathlons or whatever. But you're all through this process, you're learning that not only can you change your comfort zone, but it's extremely rewarding to change your comfort zone, because the number of experiences you can have once you broaden your horizons like that are they're limitless, really.
Yeah, and I see a thread here in terms of, you're talking about it's one step at a time. You're talking about expanding the comfort zone. You're talking about, well, gosh, I couldn't imagine riding my bike 20 miles, let alone 100 miles. And so when you're talking about the step-by-step earlier, when I'm climbing, I was climbing Mount Shuckson here a couple months ago, and it's not a long climb by any means, but, parts of it are a bit of a slog. And so as I'm, hiking, I'm counting to 10, literally in my mind. I'm thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I go, I start over again. So I keep counting to 10, because I always tell myself, I can always go 10 more steps. I can always go 10 more steps. So you talk about the mind games or tricks you were playing on your mind. I think you're saying that, Skip. I'm doing that all the time. And I do, every day I do 50 push-ups, and I don't count 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 50. Instead, what I do is I count to 10 inside, and then I start over at 1, 2. And then when I get to 2 on my second set of 10, I say the 2 out loud. Then I go 3, 4, 5 up to 10. Then I go 1, 2, 3. I say 3 out loud. So now I know I'm on my third set, and I do the 4 out loud and the 5 out loud. So again, I'm just playing these little tricks, and I can always say, okay, once I get to 40, I know I can make it to 50, because I slightly slow my pace down. And it's like, I know if I get to 40, boom, I can get to 50. So it's like you play these little games, and next thing you know, you complete it. And just like with the comfort zone, when you expand that comfort zone, as you're saying, Skip and Scott, that's where the growth takes place. But then you go back, and when you go back, it doesn't go back to where you were. You expanded what's now comfortable. So each time you expand that comfort zone, it shrinks back a little bit, but not to where you started. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so that's what's so much fun about all of this.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah, exactly. And it is rewarding when you see the change and the progress, and in not just in your comfort zone, but that's in who you are. It becomes part of who you are, and so you're 71 years old or however old you are, and you go, wow, I'm still getting better at things, and I'm still testing my frontiers and finding new horizons, and that's a pretty rewarding thing, really, all in all. Beats sitting on a rocking chair on a porch or something. So
that's right.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear how you guys think about the preparation piece, the tracking piece, for example. Do you do a lot of training prior to a climb, or is it just, it's just my lifestyle? It's where every day I'm staying fit, I'm doing things, and it's not like I climb a mountain and then I don't do anything for 3 months. And then I was like, oh, I got to prepare for 2 months for this next climb. It's just my lifestyle is fitness. And that's how I think of myself. And then how do you track everything? Like, I'm a big tracker. I mean, everything, I'm marking off every workout I do and every exercise, and it calculates this and that. And I get a lot of joy out of doing that. So I'm curious to hear from each of you how you think about preparation, training, tracking, that sort of thing.
Scott?
Yeah. So I'm somewhat of a disappointment to myself in that department. I would like to be a person who was 365 days a year, just at it, doing my push-ups and my pull-ups and all of that. But I tend to be somewhat cyclical about it. I think that if, you know, if an outside consultant came and looked at my lifestyle, it's pretty healthy and pretty fitness oriented all the time. But definitely my training becomes more intense as the spring comes along, and I start to think about the things that are on my to-do list for the summer. You know, there is a little bit of a fear factor. You sort of imagine yourself showing up, you know, being the fat guy at the trailhead. You know, you don't want to do that. You want to be as prepared as you could be. So there's the part of training that for me it intensifies when the season comes along, and even though every year I swear I'm going to keep it up, you know, through the year until the next year, I've noticed now, after, you know, many years of seeing this cycle play out, I tend to do a little bit less, and I actually think it's good for my body. I think that it's not a failure of discipline on my part. More it's my body saying, hey, you just beat this creature up for, you know, 5 months. Now it's time to let it recover a little bit. And I think that's really what it is. It's a little bit more of a natural process, just kind of letting everything get back to normal.
And do you track your workouts?
Yeah,
like
I do not.
Okay.
I do not. And I think part of that's a defensive on my part. And I know you, I mean, you've got records going back for years of what you've done. And I remember hearing about that for the first time, and I thought, no, that would just be a source of tremendous guilt for me, because there'd be all these blank spots where I was, you know, I was not working as hard as I wanted to. So so I don't track my workouts, but I'm pretty, when I get into the mindset of working out, I mean, I could tell you what I do every day. You know, it's more or less the same thing. I mean, it may vary from day to day, but I'm pushing myself in a pretty disciplined and routine manner. You know, once I flip that switch that says, okay, time to get going.
A little bit of a similar approach here. First of all, I don't keep track of my workouts. It sounds like a good idea, but I just don't do that. In my 20s and 30s, maybe a little bit into my 40s, I would take this kind of seasonal approach to getting in shape, where, okay, summer's coming. I know I'm going to want to do a lot of hiking and mountaineering. So it's springtime. I better start getting myself in shape. And that worked. Actually, in my 20s, I probably didn't even do that. It's just, okay, let's go climb a mountain. You get into your 30s and it's like, well, I need to put some effort into this and start getting in shape in the spring. And you get into your 40s and 50s. And I just decided that, first of all, once I let myself get out of shape, it was getting harder and harder to get back into shape. And the cyclicality or seasonality of it, I found, was not working very well for me. So I committed, I don't know, a decade or so ago, just to being a year-round active person. And it's not 365 days a year, but it's, I don't know, again, I don't keep track, but it's, you know, 250 to 300 days a year. At minimum, I'm going out on a 5-mile walk, or I'm going to the gym, or, you know, weights, or a stationary bike, or a swim, or I'm outside riding my bike, or outside hiking, or something. I really try to do that every day, but there are days where it just doesn't work as well. You know, in the winter, it gets darker earlier. It's harder to get outside, or built around a work day. There are days when I've got a long work day and then I'm going to dinner with a colleague or a family member, and the workout just doesn't quite fit in there. And there are days, like Scott said, where we're really, really active in the summer. And I get to about this place where we're filming this today, and, you know, my body's kind of ready for a break. And I think there's wisdom in giving it that break. I've just learned it can't be a 3-month or a 6-month break anymore, but just give it maybe a few weeks of lighter activity, and then take it back up again. But just don't fall too far off to where it's really hard to get back on again.
Yeah. And when I talked about cyclicality, I didn't mean go in couch potato mode. You know, 5 days a week. My wife and I take our dogs out, go 4 miles, I'm trail running a lot of that. That's sort of the baseline. I don't even think about that as exercise anymore. That's just kind of what we do in the morning. And but the more intensive version, which involves a lot more than just doing a 4 mile hike, is what I'm talking about. When you really push yourself and you get up early and go run up and down a 10-mile mountain and just really get yourself into the kind of shape that you want to be in so that you can go do some of these things.
Yeah, I think one of the things you guys are saying, I think, is so important, particularly for older guys like us, which is we've got to listen to our bodies. And, we're not in our 20s where, we can go get drunk off our ass on a Friday night. And then on Saturday morning, we do a 20 miler, we just can't do that anymore. So one of the things that I've been trying to do here in recent years, and it sounds like you guys have been doing for many years, which is just listening to my body. And while I work out basically every day, not every day is a hard workout. And so I'm always trying to listen to my body like, oh, I'm feeling good. So I think I'm going to go a little farther or I'm going to push it a little bit harder today. And maybe the next day it's like, I'm just not feeling it today. So, instead of, going 60 minutes, maybe I'm going to go 45 minutes or something. So it's always about listening to the body, what it is saying to you, and having that self-awareness, that maturity to know, okay, body's saying, slow down a little bit,
right?
Live for another day kind of thing. And I think that comes with a little bit of maturity as well. So appreciate you guys highlighting that point. And along those lines, let's talk about nutrition. So you guys are super trim and fit. Before we started recording here, I had a piece of apple pie for lunch, as my dessert. And sometimes I kid people and say I exercise so that I can drink wine and eat ice cream with hot fudge. So I'm curious how you guys think about diet. Do you have a hard and fast diet? Do you enjoy? Well, I know you guys enjoy some beer because I've been out drinking with you, but how do you think about your diet and how serious are you with that relative to knowing you want to be in good physical shape?
I mean, to the alcohol point, when I was 19 and a freshman or sophomore in college, I was probably consuming alcohol 7 nights a week. And gradually, you get into the workforce, that alarm's going off in the morning, and becomes not such a good idea anymore for multiple reasons. I've decided again in the last decade or so, I'm not really an alcohol consumer during the week. Because again, that alarm goes off early the next morning. I need to be sharp in the kind of work we all do. You need to have a sharp mind. And then weekends, my wife and I like to have a bottle of wine with dinner or whatever it is, things like that, or have some beers at the Broncos game with Scott, or that sort of thing. But then if I'm going out on a long bike ride, a long hike that's really pretty arduous the next day, I'm not going to consume alcohol. I might have a beer maybe, but if I know I have a really tough kind of endurance day ahead of me the next day, I know that I had this discussion with my doctor not long ago, and we talked a little bit about alcohol sometimes, and you read all the time that 2 a day for a man is fine or will have no long-term health effects. And his comment to me is, you understand the right answer is 0, right? Like in terms of your health, the right answer is 0. He said 2 is, you can have 2 a day without long-term health effects. So I think we sometimes misread that a bit, but I like to socially drink, but with that maturity thing you were talking about, Steve, I've also recognized when to set that aside in pursuit of greater goals. The nutrition thing, I've learned a lot about. I touched on that earlier, how to prepare your body better. I don't have a hard and fast diet. I have one of these days today where I've just got meetings all day long. I didn't have time for lunch. I had 10 minutes before we came on this Zoom, and you just talked about you had a piece of apple pie. I was munching a bowl of pretzels as my lunch just before we came on. And some days are like that. I have colleagues who eat a lot better than I do, and I'm kind of envious. I wish I could be a little more disciplined. I've gotten more disciplined over the years where I eat mostly good most of the time, but I enjoy a cookie sometimes too, or a beer or whatever, but you got to figure out where does that fit in your life too.
Yeah, I'm a lot more disciplined about it than I used to be. Especially I've found in the last 10 years or so, it's really made a difference. You know, this year I probably dropped 10 pounds or so, getting ready for the summer, just because, you know, if you're not thinking about what you're putting in your mouth, then you're probably like, I love cheeseburgers and all, you know, I love a good Reuben sandwich, you know, with fries and, you know, if you just set me down and, you know, at a bar, I'll have a couple beers, but I pretty much stopped doing that stuff, unless I'm out with other people at this point. So I used to drink, you know, when my doctor would ask me the question, I thought I was giving a really good answer, saying, well, I have one glass of wine a night, maybe, but that's about it. You know, maybe I'll have 2 or 3 on the weekend. I used to think that was a good answer. Now I don't drink at all unless I'm with other people. You know, it's just, you know, it's one of those things where I just don't do it anymore. And it's there's the part of my head that associates alcohol with lots of good times and pleasant events and celebrations and all that, and that part of me is still there. You know, that part of me still kind of pushes me in that direction, but the physical reality of, you know, how I feel and the enjoyment that I really get from it now, as opposed to, you know, what I think somehow I'm going to get, the equation's just not there anymore. So I basically, you know, keep the cork in the wine bottle until somebody comes over. And food wise, I've made some big changes there. Like I didn't have pretzels or apple pie. I had a smoothie, you know, for my lunch today that it's so disgusting. I won't even tell you what goes into it, but it's, you know, fruits and vegetables and a little flax seed and some matcha powder, and, you know, it looks like some horrible concoction that nobody else would ever want to drink, but I drink one of those every day. And so those, you know, I've kind of substituted those for the, you know, the giant sloppy sandwich that I used to make for myself for lunch. And it's, you know, it's made a difference. I still have my occasional bowl of ice cream. Like last night, my wife makes these wonderful cookies and put some ice cream on top of the cookies and some caramel sauce on top of that. You know, you got to give yourself a prize once in a while for drinking those horrible smoothies. But it's a lot less than I used to do, and it makes a difference. You know, it does. Like I'm probably better climbing mountains and doing hikes and stuff now than I was 5 years ago, because I've made those changes. You know, I'm probably exercising a little more intensely, but I think the main difference has just been the diet and, you know, cutting down on the alcohol and saving my, you know, my brownies and bowls of ice cream for rare occasions.
One of the fun things though is the post workout.
Post hike beer. Yeah.
Like Scott and I a few weeks ago with our big group we go with annually, we did a 33-mile hike in one day just west of Tahoe, and that's a long day. We were out there, you know, a lot of hours, and I think most of us came back to the hotel afterwards and took a shower, and you know, I looked at my GPS and the algo said I had burned 6,000 calories that day or something like that. I had zero guilt downing that cheeseburger and those couple of beers.
You can have anything you want when you hike over 30 miles. You can have anything you want. Yeah. And I did chug a glass of orange juice though when I got to the bar. That was the first thing I drank, and then I started drinking the beer.
That's smart.
Yeah. The diet piece is really interesting. And you talk about 33-mile hike, which super strenuous. And I was not on that trip, but I always love, after I've been on 2 or 3 of those kinds of trips with you guys, but other mountain climbs, what I so look forward to is that first shower after you come off the mountain, and that cheeseburger and beer that you have as you're driving off the mountain before you get to the shower. It's like, those taste so good because you work so hard for it. And again, we talk about, there's a number of threads going through the conversation today. And one of them is these little tricks that we play on ourselves. So when I think about what I eat, and I sort of kid this ice cream with hot fudge. I mean, I love cookies and cream ice cream with hot fudge, and I could eat it every night, but I wouldn't be looking like this if I did.
Yeah.
But what I will tell myself is, okay, I've had a hard week at work. It's been a good week at work. So on Friday night, I'm going to quote, treat myself with some ice cream and hot fudge. Maybe during the week, things are, I've been working hard. I got some good workouts in or whatever. I'll have ice cream, but I'm going to skip the hot fudge because it's not the weekend. So I'm playing these little games with myself that I've got to quote, earn it before I can get this treat. And again, I don't know if you guys do little things like that or not, but that seems to work for me.
No, I think so. I mean, you set a goal for yourself, whatever that might be, whether it's dietary or climbing a mountain, and part of the fun of doing that, and sacrificing, because ultimately you are sacrificing. You're doing something that's hard and difficult. I mean, I don't wake up wanting to do push-ups, but I do a lot of push-ups. But you got to reward yourself when you're done, otherwise, you lose part of the enjoyment that should come along with achieving things and accomplishing things. There should be some celebration and there should be some fun involved, and kind of the more the merrier.
Yeah. We've talked about maturity, how we've learned things over time, and just continuing with this diet here for just one more moment. I remember back in high school and college. So in high school and college, I was a distance runner. And in high school, I sort of knew about this thing called carbohydrate loading. Well, my understanding of it was you eat a whole bunch of cake the night before your cross-country race. So literally in high school, I was eating cake the night before a cross-country run. And then I get to college, and this is kind of interesting. So in college, at least when I went to college, you drank a lot. And so we're running cross country in the fall and indoor track in the winter and outdoor track in the spring. And so like on a Friday night, we'd be out with the guys and we're out drinking. And then I'd go for a run on Saturday morning and I'd feel great. And in my mind, I'm making this connection between I'm drinking beer on Friday night, I'm getting all these carbs, and I'm just like flying on Saturday when I'm doing a long run. So I'm like, beer, flying. And so literally throughout my college career, I would drink 2 beers the night before a race. And maybe it was just a psychological thing that I made that connection, or maybe there was some physiology behind it or not, but I suspect it was maybe more psychological than actual physiology. But anyway, so my knowledge of diet and how that affects performance, I think, has hopefully come a long way since those days in high school and college.
Yeah. Well, I think you tapped in again to something that I think is really important in the subject that we're talking about, which is the mental component of all of this. Even if you do something that's probably not contributing to a positive outcome, but you think it is, that can be very powerful. If you believe that something that you're doing is helping you, then a lot of it's just attitudinal. If you're trying to do something difficult, you need to go at it with a positive attitude and be ready to take it on, and whatever little tricks you play on yourself to get yourself there, I think are all good, well and good.
So we've been talking about some of the positive aspects of these adventure trips. Now, people die. I mean, I don't think on any of our trips, maybe at least not on mine. Maybe you've had some really terrible tragedies on your trips, but let's talk about some of the more difficult trips. If you can think back to either one where you had a personal difficulty, or maybe someone on your team had a personal difficulty, or perhaps you got turned back from reaching the summit or something like that. So what comes to mind in terms of a trip that was particularly difficult for each of you?
Yeah, Scott, my worst one is very clear in my mind. So I had a climb where I thought I was probably going to die, and I didn't. Obviously, I didn't. But this was one of my early 14er experiences. I actually lived out in Atlanta at the time, and I came out to Colorado and went to climb a peak called Challenger, and didn't really know what I was doing. I was very ill prepared, didn't have enough food, didn't have enough water, didn't have the right equipment. And I actually was climbing up and was having a hard time route finding up this thing. And I found these other two guys who seemed to know a little bit more about what they were doing. So I fell in with those guys. And we got to the top of the mountain. But I had noticed on my way up climbing by myself that some avalanches had come down and buried the trail, in different points along the way. So during the day, I could easily see where the trail picked up again on the other side of the slide. But when I got to the top with these guys, and a storm came in, and I went down. They were actually camped right at the base of the mountain, just sort of, I don't know, probably 2,000 or 3,000 feet off the summit. But I still had a long way to go after that. My car was parked at the trailhead that was probably another 5 miles maybe from there. And the sun started going down. I hadn't timed my hike very well. And it got dark. It started raining. I was out of food, out of water. I was soaked, and it was pitch black. And I hit the first point in the trail where the avalanche had wiped out the trail, and I couldn't see anything. I didn't know where the trail was. And I ended up wandering around on the side of that mountain till 3 in the morning, I think. I finally found my way out. But I remember at about 11, I had just been literally walking up and down the side of this mountain, not on a trail, but just trying to find the trail. And I remember there were signs posted along the trail on my way up warning about the bears in the area. And so I thought, I'm just going to walk right into a bear's den, and this is going to be the easiest meal this bear ever had. But I was drenched. I was cold. I found a hollow log and decided to try to just get in that thing and sleep until the next day, hoping that I could find the trail in the light. But as soon as I laid down, I started shaking, and I realized I was going to die of hypothermia if I didn't keep moving, because it was so I was so cold and wet. So I got out of that log, and about 15 feet up the side of the mountain, I found the trail again, and just felt my way down with my boots, just feeling the smoothness of the trail, because I literally could not see the trail. So it took me to about 3 in the morning. I came out at the trailhead. I literally almost bumped into my car because I could not see it. It was so dark. And that was I learned a lot about preparation on that trip. I learned a lot about things not to do, and how things can conspire against you. If you don't really think about what the possibilities are, and just looking at the sky and seeing it's all nice and blue, and imagining that you're gonna be back at your car at 3 in the afternoon doesn't mean that it isn't going to rain and you're not going to be out there till 3 in the morning. So I learned a lot on that trip.
So what did you do differently going forward as a result of that trip?
Well, so I was much more attentive to the clothes I was wearing. I had pants and jackets that would actually keep rain off of you instead of absorbing the moisture. And I was much more focused on food and drink, and making sure, like, if you look in my backpack, and people sometimes comment, what's all this stuff you have in your pack? Why do you have so much stuff? We're just going up for the day. It's because I know that sometimes you're not just going up for the day. You could be going up for the day and the night, and you don't really know how long you're going to be out there. And water is the same way. I drink actually relatively little water when I hike, but I always carry more than I think I'll need, just because either I might need it or somebody that I'm with might need it. So those are things. I carry headlamps during almost every hike that I do if we're going up into big mountains, because even if I think we're going to be back at the trailhead by 2 in the afternoon, you don't know that you're going to be back at the trailhead at 2 in the afternoon. And not only do I carry a headlamp, but I carry extra batteries, and sometimes even a second headlamp, even for a day hike. You just don't know what you're going to encounter. And so I try to think of what the possibilities are, and then use my imagination to kind of go even beyond what I can imagine I'm going to encounter, and just try to be prepared for that. So I'll carry a bunch of stuff, space blankets and things that in my pack that will probably always remain in their little package, and I'll never use them, but you just don't know. I mean, we've run into enough situations, certainly the one I described was one of them, but we've run into different situations on the trail where you had to take care of somebody else who was in trouble. And, just providing for yourself on the trail isn't the end all and be all. You've got to, if you're hiking with a group, or even if you're not in a group, if you encounter somebody, you take on a responsibility for their well-being that you have to be prepared to discharge. So means
So you're not referring to me there, are you,
no,
Scott?
your disaster happened down, near enough to the trailhead that we were
Near the
able to
trailhead.
get you taken care of. But things, things go wrong. I mean, we could talk about some of those too, but we've seen some people who are in pretty bad shape on the trail. I have never personally been there when somebody died, but there were times when I thought they were going to.
Mm-hmm. Skip, how about you?
So I've been fortunate that I've never been out on one of these and been with someone or happened upon someone who lost their lives. It's certainly possible, as you suggested in your question, with some of these things we do. I've never turned back because of fatigue. That's kind of an earlier question you were asking, because I've learned, as Scott has been talking about, I've learned my limits are beyond what I think they are. And yet I've been with people, I've had people in my team who reached and went beyond their limits just in terms of pure physical ability to go on. I've had people who just laid down on the trail and couldn't take another step. And you've got to figure out how to, let them get a little bit of rest so they can go on. And what do I need to get in their body to get them to go on? I mean, like Scott, I overpack now. That's one of the things I've learned. And like Scott, I've had people, I've shown up to go on a hike with someone and they look at me and say, what do you got in that pack? Well, I've got, like Scott was talking about, I got a space blanket, I've got a headlamp, I got extra batteries, I got more water than I probably could possibly drink. I got more food than I could probably eat in 2 days, even though it's a 12-hour hike or whatever. You learn along the way usually by mishap to not just prepare, but over prepare. And I've never regretted having too much stuff with me. I usually have more clothing too than I think I'm going to need, but I watch weather forecasts. I'm a real avid weather forecast watcher on these before I go out in the backcountry, and the forecasts have gotten so much better. You can get reasonably good weather forecasts for any even remote backcountry area. And yet, if the weather forecast says, 5% chance of rain, I've got my rain gear in my pack because that 5% happens and I don't have it with me. It's going to be a big problem like Scott encountered. So preparation, over preparation, knowing your limits and yet knowing you can probably go a little beyond your limit sometimes. So all that combination. Scott said it better than I could, but I agreed with every word he said about preparation.
Well, Skip, what would you say is the trip or the adventure that you're most proud of, and why?
There's so many. I was really intrigued, Steve, and I remembered you and I think, had an email exchange about this some months ago, but you said you did Mount Shuksan, and I did Mount Shuksan up in northern Washington. It's 10 miles from the Canadian border or something like that last year. And that was a real horizon expander for me. We've talked about climbing mountains, but in reality, I'm more of a trekker than a climber. I can hike forever. I don't have great technical climbing skills, but I have found myself and taken on some of those kinds of challenges where I either figured it out myself, or going in, I knew I better get professional help, that's part of life too. And on Shuksan, I had a guide who knew what he was doing and could help me with the whole rope situation. And it's like 12 pitches on that summit cone. And it's quite airy.
Yep.
When you look around. So I don't know, I'm going on here a little bit. There's so many that are that stand out, but maybe a little bit of recency bias here, since I just did that one a year ago, and it was also really well above, frankly, my previous limits in terms of technical climbing, that one kind of stands out. A few times I've done the 4-pass loop hike outside of Aspen, Colorado. Scott and I did that together close to a decade ago now, I guess. It's one of the most beautiful and taxing hikes I've ever done. It's a great big circle through the Maroon Bells Wilderness outside of Aspen, and it's 8,000 some vertical feet in a day, and you're all day at 10 or so thousand feet. And like Scott said, there are days when you don't plan to come back after dark, but that was one of those where we did. And
That's right.
Back in those days, all of 10 years ago, we had two very, very worried spouses. Oh, look at that. There's a Shuckson shot.
There's a Shuckson shot. Yeah. So since you mentioned that, so that's my climbing partner on that trip, looking up that summit cone about 600 feet up, going up the rock face with a bunch of pitches. So yeah, that was a pretty cool trip.
That looks very familiar.
That's a bold ascent, boys.
Yeah.
And if you, I don't know how well you can all see this, but so we're going up on the right side where you see that rope. But if you look over on the left side, you see people rappelling down the face here on the left. So we go up the spine here, we rappel down the face. So it was an interesting, fun trip for sure.
I took the same route, and that brings back great memories. Yeah, that's a beautiful picture. Great blue sky.
And yeah, I've got one other here. So this is like, I think this is probably one of my all-time favorite shots on Shuckson here.
Oh my goodness.
There you go.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's a beauty. Look at the clouds behind you.
I know.
That's spectacular.
It was just magic. I mean, it was just an incredible day, beautiful. And the guy who took this shot, somehow we had the clouds in the background and just perfect framing. And it's like,
see, that's one of the reasons why you do this stuff, right? I bet
absolutely.
I bet you felt as good at that moment as you ever feel in your life. There's no substitute for that.
And one other thing I want to say about this, you'll notice that I'm kneeling. And so the first trip that I did, I think I mentioned was Mount Rainier almost 20 years ago. And then it was like, I'm going to conquer this thing. I'm going to get to the summit. I'm going to stand on the top. I got my ice axe. I'm going to hold it over my head. It's like, yeah, I did it. Okay. So that was the attitude going into it. Well, it kicked my butt and I did make it to the summit, but it's like, man, I was just dead tired. But over time, I came to realize that you don't conquer a mountain. Nope. It's like the mountain allows you, to get to the top, if you kind of do the right things, if you have respect, if you have awe for Mother Nature. And I learned that over time. And so on pretty much almost every climb right after that, and certainly all my recent climbs, when I get to the top, there's no ice axe over my head. I'm taking a knee, just like I am in this picture. It's like just being grateful that I've got the health, I've got the resources, I've got the ability to be able to do this. It's like, I'm just so fortunate and blessed and just thankful. So, to me, taking a knee is that way of honoring, where I'm at. And this picture, is just one that we just got really lucky that it turned out okay.
That was fantastic. Yeah, I think that's a really important point. You got to respect the mountain, right? You always have to have that sense of awe about what you're doing and not get arrogant, no matter how many times you've done it or how often oh yeah, there is a good one. There we are. Mount Shasta, huh?
That's a good bunch.
Yeah.
And that was the return to the scene of the crime trip.
That's right. Yeah. So just make a long story short, the three of us and a whole group of other folks in 2016, part of the Skip and Chip Excellent Adventure, we're climbing Mount Shasta. I broke my ankle the morning of the trip I was just screwing around and at the base of the mountain, broke my ankle and you guys were very helpful in getting me to the hospital and getting surgery the next day in Shasta, California. But tell me a little bit about that, because that year was that was an interesting trip. I mean, aside from my situation, each of you had an interesting outcome on that trip. So let's talk about that. And then that actually leads to this picture. So which one of you would like to set the stage for what happened that year?
Well, I also did not make the summit, but I got a little closer than you did, Steve, that year,
Yeah.
but I still didn't make it. And this is, this is one of the situations where I was denied a summit because of weather, and the weather just did not cooperate that day. Most of us on that trip, with some exceptions we'll hear about in a minute, did not get to the summit. We just, I was actually part of a group. There were 2 rope groups in my group. So there were, I think, 3 of us on one rope and maybe 4 on the other. And the guides that we had kind of polled the troops about whether they wanted to continue up the mountain, and some of us wanted to go, and some of my colleagues did not want to go. And you again, you have to respect that. When people are not feeling comfortable, because we were in a storm. It was a nasty storm, and there was thunder and lightning kind of off to one side, and the going was very slow. I mean, we were, into our knees and above, trudging through the snow. And some people just were not comfortable there. And I wouldn't say I was comfortable there, but I definitely wanted to keep going. And there were a couple other people that did. But when you have that situation, then you have to respect the people that want to go down. And so the guide made the call, and I was unhappy all year. And then we'll get to chapter 2 on that story, but Skip's experience was a little different.
Yeah, Skip, tell us about your experience that year.
Yeah, so we were with the group that year, and we talked the guides into doing this on a one-day. The year before, or the year after, you can see the tents behind us. We camped partway up, which was certainly a smarter way to do it. But as Scott said, we had weather from early in the day. I mean, it wasn't light out yet when thunder, lightning was rolling through the valley below us. We knew we were in for a day. We just didn't quite know what, but the storm rolled up the mountain as we did. And one by one, the rope groups kind of dropped off for various reasons. I think some were the clients, as Scott just described, said, hey, no mas, really not up for this today. I think 1 or 2 of the guides said, hey, this is not our day, and the guide is the absolute authority in those situations. You can argue if you want, you shouldn't, but they are the authority. And if they say turn around, you turn around. But for whatever reason, and Scott and I have discussed and debated this for years, I ended up on a rope with Chip Rome and Scott Hansen from Allworth, and with the head guide. And that first year, we made it to the summit in some rough weather, and you couldn't see it from your picture there, but there's a false summit up there too. It was up in the clouds in your picture. That's always a little bit demoralizing. That's another of those mental games when you reach a false summit that you thought was the summit, and you look up and, oh, we're not done yet. But yeah, we reached the summit, came back down. We had some disappointed colleagues. You were in the hospital getting your leg put back together. But what I really admire about some of these people I hang out with is in less than a year, Scott and you, Steve, and a couple others said, hey, that mountain got the better of us last year. We got to go do it again. And Chip and I said, heck yeah, we'll go do it with you. And we all summited that year. So
that was great.
That was great. I don't know, sort of vindication. But Steve, I so agree with what you were saying earlier. You don't conquer these mountains. I've learned to respect them so much. These mountains are going to be there for millions of years after I'm going to be on this earth. I don't conquer anything about them. I get blessed with I'm blessed with the health and the motivation and whatever to get to the top of them. And I almost just want to kiss them when I'm up there. And I love your tradition of taking a knee to respect the mountain and where you are and your blessings, because that's how I feel about it. I long ago gave up the language about conquering a mountain because I realize you really don't do that. Some days the mountain conquers me.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
part is true.
when I hear people say that, I think they didn't really understand the experience that they had, because that's not what it is at all. It is a privilege to be able to get to the top of the mountain, and you need to be grateful that you.
We do, and
yeah.
Yeah, I'll just share a couple other quick pictures here of Shasta. So this is the summit plateau, and
that's a great shot.
Those of you watching this, yeah, another one of my favorite shots here is you can see the line of folks in the center, and then going off to the left, and then up to the very top of that point there. So that was phenomenal. But then there's another fun story that when we got to the top in 2017, we had some other visitors up there, and I've got a picture of that too, so I'm going to share that, and I'll let one of you guys share the story here of what we're seeing here. Yeah. So
it goes to my point of you never know what you're to expect. So sometimes you find naked people at the summit of the mountain.
That's right.
This is the year we went back, and I think so. This is Chip Rome's yellow jacket on the far right. That's me on the top holding. The guide wanted us to get a picture with their sign. Fine. And we got up there, and there were half a dozen or so other climbers at the top. And I remember saying to our team, "Hey guys, let's get our picture." And we started sort of going to the top of that little rock pile, the really tippy top, to get our picture. And I hear this guy behind me saying, "No, I want to get my picture. I'm freezing." And I turned around, and he's naked. And I thought, it's like 20 degrees up here with like 30-mile-an-hour winds.
Yeah. Make no mistake, that was a cold day at the summit.
I mean, keep your clothes on, and maybe you wouldn't. I don't know. That was. I've had 2 or 3 really bizarre, unexpected experiences on a mountaintop. This was one of them. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, that was weird, and I think they were from France, because I think they were speaking French, and then they just whipped their clothes off when they got to the top. And I don't know what point they were trying to prove there, but that was sort of interesting. And we've got a record of it, that's for sure. Well, guys, this is great. I would love to finish here with maybe some lessons learned, some insights, some wisdom from your time on the mountains and the adventures, and maybe how you're applying some of those things here off the mountains. What are some of your thoughts there?
You can always do more than you think you can, is one of mine. Steve, you said it earlier, I'll repeat it. When you get to the summit, you're only halfway done, because the true goal is to get back down, not to get to the summit. My true goal is always to get back down to my loved ones. Otherwise, you haven't really accomplished anything. And the last thing for me, and I think Scott said it earlier, the biggest thing I've learned out there is that the only thing I control is myself. And I've really carried that into my life. I don't control other people. In the context of this conversation, I don't control the weather, the mountain, anything else. I can only control myself, and I have to really focus my energy on controlling myself and the things I can control, and be in a position to react to things that happen around me in a way that will still allow me to attain my goals.
Yeah, I think, the idea that we've talked about over and over again today about preparation is just really important. It's just whether it's in business, life, climbing mountains, just to be as prepared as you can be, because there are going to be, unless you have just the perfect day, there are going to be things you encounter that you didn't expect or you can't control. And so you have to be as prepared as possible. And that's not just having the right equipment, that's doing all the work, for months before you go, eating right. Don't try to climb up one of these mountains with a bad hangover, do your push-ups, all of those things that we've talked about. You've got to get yourself in a place where you're prepared both mentally and physically. And then the other thing that I think that I keep thinking about every time I do one of these is just this idea that every great task is accomplished one step at a time. if you try to grasp the magnitude of what you're doing, it could be overwhelming. So if you could break things down one step at a time, just focus on moving from point A to point B, and then to point C, and then to point D. Then before you know it, unless things conspire against you, you'll be at the summit. And I think that's just an important lesson. Is people can never take the first step because they're too worried about the bigness of what they're trying to do. And I think that denies you the opportunity to have the experience of getting to the top of the mountain and getting back down again. So those are the things I think that I take away most from this experience, climbing these mountains.
Well, guys, that's beautiful. So what's the best way for folks to stay in touch with you? I know, Scott, I know you're active on LinkedIn, and Skip, folks want to stay connected with you. What's the best way to do that?
At Skip Schweiss on Twitter might be the easiest way to reach me.
Yeah, LinkedIn is good, or Scott at firstascentam.com. That's my email. That's on our First Ascent website. You can find my contact information, phone numbers, email, all that good stuff. So I'm easy to find. Yeah,
you are. All right, guys, this has been great. I so appreciate it. And I'm very fortunate to be able to call you guys friends, to be able to do some trips with you up into the mountains. It's been wonderful. And just one other thing I would add to the lessons that you guys just described here is just the importance of the team. And I learned that firsthand on that first Shasta trip where you guys were there, and you guys and some of the other folks there in the group just helped me because I was helpless, broken ankle. What am I going to do? So everybody chipped in and helped me get back to the trailhead, helped me get into the car, helped me get to the hospital, helped. And Scott, I think you drove my rental car, back down to Sacramento or something. So it just really was helpful to have the team here. So I so appreciate that. And it's been great. So I appreciate you guys coming on here today.
Yep. Here's to our next adventure, guys. Yep.
All right.
Good one. Thanks for having us, Steve.
Thank you.